Hello and welcome back. Today I thought I would have a little chat about the vexatious problem of how to evaluate your digital health solution in the British healthcare system. Because there is no fixed or set answer necessarily, but there are some intimations or indications about routes that you can take to prove the efficacy of the product you have. And by digital health I mean any sort of mobile or electronic healthcare solution, whether it be a wearable through a phone or maybe a website as a delivery mechanism, or conjoined. For example, maybe you might offer something like biomarker testing through blood or other bodily fluid samples that's linked to an app, gives you results about your health, well-being, etc. It spans a whole load of products that can or cannot be medical devices, depending on the definition. Anyway, the problem is a lot of the existing regulations for how you win contracts for the healthcare service. This is what you might call B2G or business to government contracts or business to NHS contracts, rather than B2C, business to customer contracts. Were built around the standards designed for the pharmaceutical industry and not digital healthcare solutions. And there's been something of a quandary about how one might go about proving that the product, service, whatever, actually works. And currently, as of 2020, there's a few routes which I might briefly describe for you, and then talk around some of the wider problems and what we know is acceptable in terms of evidence and also proof. So, probably one of the largest documents to come out recently in May of 2019 was the NICE Evidence Standard Framework for Digital Technologies. It's a large document setting out different types of criteria, different levels of proof. If you're working with something like machine learning or AI, it's going to be different than if you've got a health and well-being related app. What kind of standards of evidence you might need for patient feedback, let's say, what types of economic analysis you might want, and some basic indications in the direction that you might go. However, NICE, the National Institute for what used to be called Clinical Excellence, is now called something different, is not the only player in town. They are a non-governmental department, meaning they're not in a department, but they are a governmental body, but it's not the only person that's provided evaluation guidance, although it's perhaps possibly the most extensive. One point about NICE is, again, talking back to the pharmaceutical industry, if you have to have your product evidenced through NICE to get contracts with the NHS with the pharmaceutical industry, your digital health solution, even if it's evidenced against the NICE framework, it does not give you any guarantee that it will be commissioned in any way, and you won't get your large payday or any contractual obligations on behalf of the health service. However, it is an extensive framework and it does exist, and I am sure it will probably be updated at some point. Other areas to look at are, for example, NHS Digital has released guidance about digital assessment questionnaires that might give you some kind of ideas about how you might evaluate the product that you've got, list of questions, and the guidance they use for their assessors, for example. The NHS app library has its own assessor application form and list of digital assessment questions that you can look up as well. Again, these are both frameworks of a sort that you can apply to your products if you wish to use them. Again, there is no standard approach to which is best to use. In primary care, the NHS launched a toolkit for online consultations. It has a list of questions and references and what you might call it reflective questions for you to look at, and checklists to see how your product would accord to what they think something should look like in primary care for online consultations. If we move into 2020, Public Health England have produced a large online set of documents listing methodologies, lots of background reading. I think there's one checklist in there and larger guidance about methods, if you want to use focus groups, randomized controlled trials, alpha beta testing, etc. That's on their webpage that you can find as well. So Public Health England, as opposed to NICE or the NHS app or NHS Digital, we've also got guidance to look at. Orca, if you're thinking more of a technical point of view, reviewing the actual technical aspects rather than its implementability into the healthcare service, have checklists and guidance, etc. that you can use. I'm sure there's probably more that I can't think of off the top of my head. this leads you to the problem that there is no fixed guidance. If you want one single answer about how can I get my digital health product evaluated so that it's commissioned into the health service, the answer is there is not a standard approach, there is not a standard framework. You will have to find what works best for you, and there are a limited number of options for how you can get real world, testable, implementable experience in your product. And this is the big challenge, and there are a few unique organisations that work in this space that will provide you testing in real world scenarios that then can be mapped to some kind of framework. So the long story short is there isn't a solid answer. Some people will get commissioning contracts through way of networking, or should we call it personal connections. However, you might also find that even if you do manage that method, you will soon discover that you're asked to do post-contractual evaluation work, meaning you win a nice big fat government contract, whatever it might be, local, regional, national, etc. Then you have to prove that your product works afterwards, so you're still stuck within the same pressures really to evidence. For primary care, NICE is probably the only thing I could say. CCGs, the clinical commissioning groups, are held to the standard of NICE frameworks from a legal point of view, so that is probably the one way to go if your product is primary care related, so mainly GP practices, but also that includes things like pharmacies, opticians, etc. First point of contact in medicine and healthcare. The last point, to summarise this video, not make it go on too long, very helpfully, the lead for NICE is Medical Device Regulation Panel, to call it in a manner, summarised 5 years of meeting minutes for what they do and do not find acceptable from their applications. This is companies applying to NICE to get registration and basically to prove that their product is meets the threshold to be used in an NHS service. Then they filled all the evidence for what was accepted, what was rejected, and then tried to analyse statistically what NICE actually wants from their ratios of acceptability for evidence criteria. So one thing to take away is randomised control trials don't really mean that you're going to get an acceptable NHS contract. So lots of people spend huge amounts of money and go in too quickly for randomised control trials, and then it doesn't necessarily prove anything. They can be quite often inconclusive, and the confidence intervals for your outcome measures are so wide you can't really meaningfully prove anything, and you've spent a lot of money and gone nowhere. Much better to have small packages of individual evidence on individual topics, economics. Maybe you want a small research study on something like the usability of a piece of technology, etc. Published, peer-reviewed, published in different journals, and not one big RCT, randomized control trial. That's probably the only thing you can take away. They did publish the paper. There's 2 papers published on this topic written by the lead for NICE's medical device evaluation unit, whose name I should remember, but I can't off the top of my head. I'm sure you might be able to find it. That's the point though. They don't like pilot studies, and more than often than not they want a diversity of evidence and not one large piece. So that's really all I can say to you at the minute. There is no conclusive conclusive mechanism, conclusive framework. If I had to pick one, I'd probably say NICE, but others will almost undoubtedly come out, and how you go about your evaluation for this area of technology and healthcare is still partly up for debate, and the best approach is sometimes hard to come by, and it may have to be customized to the needs of what you're talking about, your actual product itself. I won't waffle anymore, but there you go. There's my starter for 10 about how to approach doing evaluations with e-health, m-health, digital healthcare solutions.